here where our family is joining from. So welcome to Can Do Links to Learning. It is Tuesday, November 15th. Dare I say it's the middle of the month, and I hope it's the 15th. I hope I'm not getting that date wrong. But here we are in November. I hope wherever you are that you are safe, that you are happy, that you're healthy, that you're here. So that tells me that you're willing, ready to build your capacity and just take in the good knowledge. So we're honored that you're here. We're honored that you've joined us this afternoon. I love hearing. All right, so we got Winnipeg Treaty 1 territory in the room. We got Coldwater Indian Band. BC is in the room. Kear's joining us from Toronto. I'm in Amiskwaciy, Waskahigan, Edmonton. And if I remember correctly, Patricia is in Saskatchewan or Manitoba. It's one of those prairies. So welcome, everyone. I hope your day is going well. Let's just take a moment. Let's just press pause, maybe take a deep breath, maybe take a sip of your water, and just take a moment to acknowledge the gift of this day, that when we woke up this morning, that was Creator meeting us for another day. And isn't that a gift in itself? So here we are, taking in some good knowledge, being inspired by story, by listening to one another. So we give thanks for all of the gifts that Creator has given to us. First and foremost, the gift of this land that we live on, the gift of the sun. Maybe the sun isn't shining where you are, but the sun is there, maybe behind some clouds. So daylight is here. The animals, our teachers, I always say, I have this wapoose, this bunny who's always near my home. And I always feel good when I see our relatives. The gift of water, the gift of land. So Mother Earth, we give thanks for all of the gifts. We give thanks for our friends and our family, and just opportunity to be able to grow and to learn as community together. So we give thanks for all of these gifts. We lift our hands to you, Creator. Hi. Okay, well, today is going to be a good session. We got Kear here. He joined us last week on Innovate BC. So if you like what he's sharing, be sure to go into the vault, into Can Do Vault, so into our resources, and you can check out the presentation he brought last week. It is different. He's talking about this youth program, this amazing program that they have to offer. So today's conversation is Indigenous inclusion and closing the gap. So Indigenous inclusion on industry projects has significantly increased across the board for most industries. There are multiple factors relating to this increasing level of engagement and inclusion, such as government mandates, UNDRIP laws, broader reconciliation and Indigenous history knowledge. All of that is really, really important. But many companies, clients, and communities are struggling to keep up with this ever-changing environment and demand. So greater collaboration leads to better outcomes, but this takes time and it takes effort. So today, Kear's going to talk, we'll go over the tools. I love tools and strategies that will help you find and work with partners to seize the project opportunities that you have. So talk about capacity building. So just a little bit about our guest speaker. He is the Director of Indigenous Relations for QM Environmental. So in this role, he leads partnership development as well as supports Indigenous initiatives and programs on projects across Canada. So this guy just has a lot of knowledge, a lot of understanding in the field in which he works. So we're just honored that you've decided to spend another hour with us here at Can Do. So thank you for being with us. Just another note, before I pass this mic over to you, please, 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 when we're finished today's presentation, there's going to be an evaluation link sent to you all. We love to hear your feedback. Your voice is important. So when you fill in that evaluation link, your name is gonna, I love saying this, your name is gonna be entered to win a draw, which we do at the end of the month for one $500 Visa gift card. I love saying that. And so please, it's in your best interest and it's in our best interest that you fill out those evaluation forms. All right, so thanks for being with us. So Kear's joining us from Toronto, but he hails from Victoria. So welcome. Good to have you here again. The mic's yours.
Thank you, Michelle. Thank you. And thank Candu for allowing me to present again. It's a real honor to be able to share my knowledge on this platform. So I'm happy to have conversations about what I'm presenting throughout the presentation, or at the end. I'm happy to take whatever. And thank you everyone for showing up. I'm going to share my screen. So it should be full screen now for everyone. See the nod from Michelle. So yeah, thank you again. So Kear Porttris from QM Environmental, and we're going to talk about partnerships and what that looks like, and the different tools that both the government's using, but how also to be prepared, coming from your communities or clients, or depending on where you're at. So I'm the Director of Indigenous Relations. I serve our teams nationally. Even though I'm based in Victoria, as a national company, we have projects literally from coast to coast to coast. And so anytime anyone needs some help, they reach out to me. I'm Métis-Chinese, Métis on my father's side, originally from Regina, Saskatchewan. So I see Patricia here on the call. I think she's from the prairies in that region. So great to see some prairie people and some other people from Manitoba, I think, as well. And my mom's a Chinese immigrant. So I've walked in many worlds for most of my life, which is also, I'm really blessed to be able to bring culture and my personal experience into this role. I think many of us on this call, that's something that we all do. And so I think that's a really important place to actually kind of jump off of and think about who you are and what kind of culture you bring into the partnerships and the work that you do. I'd like to kick off as well to acknowledge the lands of the Huron-Wendat, the Seneca, and the Mississaugas of the Credit in Toronto, where I'm located today. I know we're all coming from different parts of the country right now, and so just think about the lands that you're from. To give you a little bit on us, we're about over 500 people within our company, so yeah, pretty big. And we, like I said earlier, we do coast to coast to coast, providing environmental and industrial services. We are also well positioned to meet the diverse and evolving needs of our clients, to the country, and Canadians in general, offering everything from really specialized services on a very large scale, that are complex end-to-end solutions, to everyday stuff too that any other environmental company can do. We're lucky to have a really great group of guys with lots of really, not just guys, of people, I should say, with really great experience both in consulting and contracting, which allows us to tackle very large complex projects. To give you an idea of what we do, so we do demolition and decommissioning, environmental remediation and water treatment, hazmat abatement, emergency management and response, as well as waste management and disposal. So, a lot of, I think we're one of the largest companies who do all of these under one roof. nationally speaking. So, often you'll see one company providing one or multiples of these, but not necessarily everything under the same roof. And we've worked with communities all across Canada in different capacities, whether as partners or clients or in collaboration on different projects. So these are just some of the projects that we've worked on across Canada. As you can see, as far north as Resolute Bay up there. So and lots of work on the West Coast and a fair bit of work in Ontario. And even though we have a deep and broad history of working with different peoples and different nations and different clients, we've entered a very different era, I would say. And I think this era of inclusion is something that we see every day in this space. Especially, I think CanDo, actually, I know CanDo has just brought on John Johnstone from the feds to help usher in higher levels of inclusion. But we're seeing this at so many different levels, not just at the federal level anymore, provincial level, municipal governments, regional governments, private clients. We're seeing this really big movement in different ways to include local nations as well as sort of broader Indigenous inclusion. I don't think, and I'm in a role obviously that is governed by Indigenous topics, but I don't think there's a day that doesn't go by that people don't talk about different ways of including nations in a meaningful way. Not just, I think we're moving past the tokenism of inclusion and into something more meaningful and long-standing. One of the ways this is happening is through the procurement, Public Services and Procurement Canada's mandates of creating at least, so the floor is 5% of all federal contracts awarded in Canada to be awarded to businesses managed and led by Indigenous peoples. So that means Indigenous business in some way, shape, or form, whether it's sole proprietors or whether they're incorporated or whether they're joint ventures. 5% of PSPC work is pretty substantial. We're talking, PSPC does hundreds of millions of dollars worth of work a year across Canada. So, that 5% is pretty ambitious. They've been under that 5% for quite some time. So having this mandate as the minimum spend has created a lot of interesting initiatives and programmings that we're seeing with the government. But what's happening too is companies like QM are starting to react to that because the different tools that the government's putting out. And when they put this mandate out in 2020, it actually was followed by planning. So everyone's like, okay, here's the 5%, what's happening? It took them almost 2 years to really start pumping out contracts on the regular that we're trying to hit that 5%. So and so I'll just go into some of the different tools that both public sector and private sector are using right now to, I guess, reach either that 5% or more. In the public sector, they've had this thing called the procurement strategy for Indigenous business. If you've been in this realm for a while, you've heard of that, and there are some challenges, let's say, with that, but there's also some benefit. Really what we've been seeing in the last couple of years are these Indigenous benefit plans or Indigenous participation requirements. They've had a couple different names since they've been trying them over the last couple of years, but those are the two that I've seen the most. In private sector, it really is about, trying to find those evaluation criteria. So adding Indigenous evaluation criteria is something that I'm seeing a lot of. Developing Indigenous benefit plans. So, finding ways and developing plans to get communities involved and businesses involved. Impact benefit agreements. So anyone who works in the resource sector has seen or heard, or maybe some of the communities that are on this call today have those. And, again, in the private sector, partnerships across the whole band, obviously, but partnerships are definitely a tool to be leveraged within your communities and regions. So the procurement strategy for Indigenous business, if you've never heard of it, is a federal program or tool, if you will, that only allows Indigenous businesses and partnerships to bid on federal projects. And they have 6 different types, but really at the end of the day, what it does is it creates an opportunity for Indigenous businesses to pursue this work. So projects big or small, and when I say small, they're usually $100,000 or more, and big can be as much as tens or maybe even 100 plus million. So pretty broad access to projects on this level. They have very stringent, just like every other federal program out there, they have very stringent eligibility criteria. So really focuses on Indigenous ownership and control. So even to get registered within the Indigenous business directory and to apply under this or to submit a proposal under this, that's sort of the first bar. So 51% or more of the company needs to be owned and or controlled by an Indigenous person, entity, community. If it's a joint venture partnership, 33% of the value of the contract needs to be performed by the Indigenous partner. So if it's a joint venture partnership, you can't just sort of just say you're working together and then not prove. They really want to see that 33% contract value. And through this program, there's pre and post award audits that they can do. So to make sure that you meet the criteria within the submission that you do, but also to meet the criteria through the project. So you have to be aware of those, because if you don't pass the criteria, if you don't pass that audit, you will get disqualified. If you don't pass that audit after, then it can create problems for you as a business on future projects. The challenge, like I was saying with this, and many of you might know this, is that it's been poorly executed and sort of established through the 3 decades that it's been around. And one of the challenges is that it's an easy off-the-shelf solution for many procurement staff. So they can just say, yeah, check the box. And what happens is when they check the box, they haven't changed the contracts to allow for greater access to businesses. So what I've seen through this is most Indigenous businesses have to create partnerships to apply for this work. So even though the idea was, and I think still is, to support capacity and community, the project still seemed to be out of reach for many Indigenous businesses on their own. The other issue that I've personally seen multiple times is often it's a copy-pasted approach to the off-the-shelf use of this program. So I've seen literally a $5 or $10 million contract, which was the main non-Indigenous side of the contract, so the non-PSAB. And what they did for the PSAB is they set aside. So if you've heard set aside for PSIB, they set aside, I think, $100,000 or $200,000 worth of contract for an Indigenous business to bid on, but they literally copy pasted the $10 million contract. So the Indigenous business that was putting in for that work still needed something like 5 senior engineers on the bid, and they still needed 10 people deep of staff for the bid. So even to bid on that much smaller part of the contract, you still needed a partner, because most most Indigenous businesses working in that space would not have the capacity for that. So pay attention to that if you're interested in the PSIP program. There, as exciting as it is, there you have to be aware that there's some definite requirements that you have to do. The Indigenous benefit plans and participation requirements are a lot more focused, if you will. So what I'm seeing through these is they're now doing regional or local focus. So they have to be from, nations X, Y, and Z. The other thing with criteria on this one is they specify, even though it's broadly specified, they say, show us your training plan, show us your employment plan, show us your business plan to bring on Indigenous businesses from nations X, Y, and Z. Most recent criteria that I saw was fairness. So you were also graded on your proposal on how many people you would bring on from each affected nation. So you couldn't just say, hey, we're going to bring on, 10 people. I had to say, we're bringing on 8 people and 4 people from this nation, 4 people from that nation. And actually, when we did hiring for the project, we had to align our hiring to that too. So we had a couple people that we wanted to put to work, but unfortunately, we were through this process had to kind of make that decision on who we were bringing on through those nations. And sometimes you see in others. So that could be scholarships, that could be just some other fun, cool procurement thing that you've thought of. The other thing that I've been seeing through this is the evaluation weighting for this piece is between 5 and 10%. So it's fairly significant. And then the other side is regular reporting is often connected to these. So again, it's not just here, this is what we proposed and we're good, that the government is checking in on this, and communities should understand that these aren't just requirements that can be forgotten, but that the government is actually keeping everyone accountable. In terms of sort of private sector, but this also applies to some public sector stuff, is including evaluation criteria that really adds to Indigenous business. So if you have businesses within your communities, that you should be working with your project partners or your clients to put in evaluation criteria if they're going to bid it out openly, because evaluation criteria can help Indigenous businesses win projects by, recognizing, very similarly to the IBP, training, employment, business, scholarship, all those types of things can be determined through that evaluation criteria. So I actually saw one project where it had very normal, like 3 points for technical, 2 points for cost, 3 points for, all these things. And then it was like essentially 70 points for Indigenous inclusion on that project by the local community. So it was a really interesting way to say, okay, like, you still need to give us a good technical thing, you still need to give us a good cost, but if you can show us how you're working with the nation the best, or if the nation wanted to propose on this project themselves, that they could actually win. So that's a big part of it. I think the other side with evaluation criteria is that you can set up requests for qualifications. You can ask for more Indigenous project history and also staff requirements through this evaluation criteria, which makes it a lot more flexible and a lot more, I think, beneficial for nations if you're the clients, or if you want to be participants and included in these projects, you can be part of those discussions or part of those submissions. Indigenous engagement plans are exactly, I think, what they sound like. So requiring people in the private sector to be planning what Indigenous engagement looks like on their projects. So what training, what employment, again, which businesses. They take a little bit more time, but what happens is through this process, it can be a lot more collaborative. right? People can sit down with you and say, hey, you know, there's this $250 million project in your region and we want to talk to you and see what this means. That you can sit down with them and go through a plan and say, yeah, we could probably give you 4 people, or we could give you 10, or we have these businesses, you know, does that fit what you're looking for? So the responsibility on this often is with the person doing the proposal, but it's a lot more engaging than the other ones, because the other ones you can just write it down, right? You can just say, yeah, we're going to put 10 people to work. This requires that extra step. Impact benefit agreements. So I'm sure many of you have heard about these. If you work in the resource industry, you know, proponents within that industry have to abide by the agreements that they set in terms of employment, training. Sometimes it's profit sharing or royalties. Everyone is different, but you really have to pay attention to these IBPs, because even though the proponents have a duty to try to fulfill them, it is a try to fulfill them. You know, I think with communities and Indigenous businesses on the other side of this is you have to identify those pieces that you can work with the proponent to maximize your IBAs. Because, you know, depending on who your partner is and who the proponent is, you know, they might just say, hey, we tried, that's okay, and we couldn't find anyone. Where you want to be able to say, hey, these are the different things that are listed, this is what we want to do, and this is what you said you were going to do, and approach it like a partnership. Don't approach it just like, hey, this is what's written down, this is what we're owed, but really, you know, look at it like a partnership and work with the proponents to find a way that you can fulfill it or exceed those IBAs. Because at the end of the year, those projects will be better off with your inclusion and with higher levels of collaboration. Because on the proponent side, they're looking to reduce risk. So what happens is, if you can say, hey, we've been, you know, good partners, they've been good partners from day one, that we want to continue being good partners, then their investors and their ownership are going to be happier and you know, more keen to be more involved. Where if you come back and say you're not fulfilling your IBA commitments because XYZ, you want to be able to say, we've been there with you the whole time, and we're working with you to do that. Partnerships with non-Indigenous businesses and in the private sector, you know, this is huge, and you see partners, you know, at different levels. When I say partners within this, it's having joint ventures or having incorporated businesses with people outside of your community or outside of your business. I see partnerships as something being extremely active. So I think having, you know, bringing your capabilities, your access to decision makers, a lot of the political force that you have as Indigenous communities, you bring that to the table. And what happens is your partners should bring a lot of operational strength. They should bring a lot of industry knowledge. And so what happens is you can work together to put pressure and to work with the client or the proponent, whoever you're working with, through that partnership to make better outcomes and better inputs and feedback from those clients and proponents. Because what happens is you can go to that higher level to say, hey, you know, we think that this might be a good way to do it. And then at the operational level, really at the ground level, to have good project managers give feedback to their procurement staff to be able to have that kind of dual pressure into projects so that you can get the outcomes that you want. There are also passive relationships, right? If you have an energy relationship, maybe that you're just like, hey, you know what, we'll take our 5% or our 10% or 7% at the end of the year. You're doing good. You're not losing money. We're good to go, right? There are those partnerships too, depending on what sector and what capacity you have in your community. And it just really depends on what works best for you guys and your situation. This is probably one of my favorite, and I think everyone can agree that direct awards are the best way to get work. um, it takes a lot more time, a lot more lobbying, and advocacy work, I think, is maybe the best way to say it. It's balancing a lot of pieces. The reason why I actually use this picture is because there's two rocks on the bottom, because often when you're going through the process of trying to get a direct award, often you need a champion within the client or proponent organization to say, hey, you know what, we can do this and we're going to do this. So let's do this together. It's super collaborative, and it's the best way to be able to say, hey, we've got that project, because I've seen lots of projects at the federal level or other levels where it's still 3 to 20 people submitting proposals for one piece of work. And so if it's 1 in 20, you're talking 5% win rate, right? Where this, you can say, hey, look, we can do that. And often what I would say is the client who you're negotiating this direct award, the client can actually still get lots of value for their project. One of the things that I've heard lots is, you know what, like, we get less value, or we can't do that because we have to show that we're being competitive and we're getting the lowest cost or best value for this project. That you can say, hey, actually, this is best value because you're including us, because you're meeting your mandates, you're building relationships. We're able to bring on more people or training things because we're working through this process together, instead of just saying we can't afford it because you pushed us through this process and we had to cut all that training piece because it was going to cost another 10% and we wouldn't have won. Right. So I think taking that collaborative approach to this direct award is part of it. Again, it takes a lot of work, a lot of collaboration to work with those proponents and clients. On the nation or the business side, you really have to be prepared. You have to go to those industry events. I was actually just in Yellowknife, where all the communities in that area had attended industry days for a large project up there. And it was very much like this. Hey, a lecture or going to those bid meetings. When you see a project come up that, you make the time to go, because that's where you meet people. That's where you learn about the project. There's a lot of preparation that needs to go into these things so that you're able to connect with the right people and present the information that's needed to fulfill some of those tools that I went over earlier. A big part of this is talking to the client. I know many of you are already doing this in your communities, right? You're talking to PSPC, you're talking to Department of National Defense, you're talking to DFO, maybe Parks Canada. But a big part of it is to say, okay, what's on the horizon? What's coming down the chute? What types of projects are you talking about? What are the timeframes, right? Because I've seen this lots too, where, somebody will say, man, we've been talking to them for 6 months, and then they just release the project, and now we have 2 weeks to have a partnership, right? So a big part of it is to say, when are you releasing the project? And if they say, hey, it's going to come out in 8 months, hey, you've got 8 months to get ready to either find a partner or get your business ready or assess what that looks like. The other side is, if you're looking for a partner in that space, that it gives you the time to talk to the client and say, well, who usually works on these types of projects, right? Sometimes, many of you, if I asked you before, you coming, if I said, who works in the environmental services field, right? Many of you might not know, right? And so being able to ask the client or the partner or the proponent to say, who would you recommend, or who are some businesses that you might line up for this kind of work, that gives you a head start too. Also, what are the project requirements, right? So let's say it's $100 million project and they're going to require insurance and bonding. You have to understand what those cost. That could be tens, if not hundreds of thousands of dollars on some of these projects. Mind you, it's sometimes over the life of the project. Sometimes you have to get approved before the project, but finding out those different project requirements will also help you find the right partner if you're looking for a partner, or to help you start reaching out to those insurance companies and buying equipment, right? You might have an excavator, but it might not be the right size, right? So it's those types of things that taking the time to talk to the client is super important. Another piece is identifying your current capacity. This takes a lot of time, and but it's about reaching out to community, right? Having your businesses and your current businesses and partnerships ready for what this looks like. And if they have the capacity, saying, normally we can't do jobs more than $5,000. Okay, well, if you're going to be bidding on the $5 million job, what do you have to do to get there? Available members for employment and training. So this happens a lot too, is, I've been to lots of bid meetings, and some communities have this information, some of them don't, but having a ballpark idea of who in your community could work on a certain project, and who in the community could benefit from training, right? So even just having a ballpark to say, what, a few months ago we did a survey, or bringing your employment training manager to some of these meetings are a way to kind of streamline those discussions. The other side is, finding out what kind of schooling, apprenticeships, or experience some of those people within your community have, or that you might need to get them up to that point for a project, right? So if a project is a year or two out, and you need, you're probably going to need 5 heavy equipment operators, maybe find somebody local who can give that type of experience, so that when that larger project comes down the chute, that you're able to say, hey, we trained 5 guys, 3 of them are working and 2 of them are available right now. So that's part of it. And then again, just finding those potential partners. So do you have the bandwidth to work with those potential partners, and do you have templates and stuff like that available, so that you're able to share what your needs are on the project? And being prepared for partnership discussions is obviously something that's important as well. A big part of it for me is knowing the norms in the industry. So you might not know the industry when you first start getting into something, but learning the norms, so learning the profit margins and the cost margins for people is important, because you don't want to say, hey, we want 15% of the take, when on that job might be 15% of what the business would be proposing on. And so often it gets difficult if you bring it up to the executive level or the ownership level, where they're like, you're going to double the amount of margin that we have on this job and we won't be able to do it. So knowing those margins is important to understand, your bargaining position, the types of careers that are available within that industry. So not just looking at this project, but looking at the broader scale, and equipment and assets. Like I was saying earlier, you might have a small excavator, but it might be too small for the project. So being able to understand the needs also helps you negotiate and find out what might work through the project. I think being honest about capacity is good. It's not about necessarily saying what you want, but what you can do, right? You don't want to say, hey, we can put 20 people to this job, and then when you start the job, you've planned for 20 people from community and you only have 3 come out, right? And so that honesty has to go both ways too, right? How much are you going to pay people, right? So if the partner or whoever you're working with says, we're only going to pay them $15 an hour, but those are $35 an hour jobs, right? Nobody's going to want to work a 35-hour job for $15 an hour, right? So I think those are those things when you're having those conversations around honest conversations around capacity. And also having templated agreements is something. We have some, I've developed some through QM, and it's just the base point. But I've been to, many partnership discussions with community and businesses where it's like, oh, shoot us a template. And it's like, okay, well, it might be more streamlined if you have something that your legal counsel is fine with, or that your leadership is familiar with. Because if you have to start from scratch every single time, that's very time consuming. And when some of these projects drop and you don't have a lot of time, that you don't want to miss out on that opportunity because you had a 30-page partnership agreement or a 100-page partnership agreement when it could have been 5. And it could have been something that you're familiar with. So being prepared is one of the most important things, I think, when you're starting to look for these things, and not waiting, I guess, is part of that. I went through that pretty fast. I know that was a lot of information, but I really wanted to leave a little time to discuss. So if anyone has any questions or anything like that, let's take the time now to do that. This is some information on QM if you want to look us up on Facebook or LinkedIn or Instagram. I think that's the middle one there. That you can look us up, but let's have some discussion if you want.
Thanks so much, Kear. You did bring some good knowledge. I see Patricia is ready with some questions. She posted one way back when you were talking about evaluation criteria. So it's in the chat box. So I don't know if you want to jump on, Patricia, or she's just asking where you find the evaluation ratings.
I have lots of questions, and so nice to see you again, Kear. And I totally agree with you. So one of my questions is, when companies like yourselves, in terms of QM, when do they get government involved? And I know that we're talking about the procurement strategy, but when we're talking about partnerships, a lot of times nations or specific dev corps will come in and look at provincial government and or federal government in terms of supporting some of those initiatives. Any experience in terms of when government gets involved, when they should get involved? So for example, here in Saskatchewan, we've got the Indigenous Economic Development Trade and Export. And then we also, our government also created the, I want to say, Indigenous investment. So they allocated X amount of dollars, to help nations in terms of building, whether it's agriculture or some other specific projects.
Yeah, so good question. I think it's multi-layered. Let's start on the evaluation piece. So what happens is at the federal level, they actually have federal law that governs the way that they procure stuff. So what happens is once they release an RFP, it's very difficult to change pieces of that RFP. So you have to get ahead of it as an Indigenous community, as an Indigenous business, depending on who you're talking to. You literally have to get ahead of it before they release it, because after they release it, and I've seen this so many times, the procurement people are like, we can't do anything. That's it. It's released. So when you're getting engaged, or when you're engaging government, before that project even hits the streets, you have to start talking to them about different ways that make sense for your business or your community to maximize their opportunity on that business. So that can differ, and I've seen at the provincial level, it loosens up a little bit. At the municipal level, and then obviously at the private level, they can do almost whatever they want. So that changes, but again, being able to get ahead of it and saying, hey, like, we're to bid on it, we need this. And I used to work at an engineering firm, actually, and on the private level, what they did is they actually cut up this much larger contract into smaller contracts that the local nation businesses could bid on individually. So they bid out the large contract that, I don't know, let's call it $100 million. They bid out that $100 million contract to a general contractor, but they cut up like 3 or 4 different work packages that were like $200,000 each, right? So that's a huge part of it is, it's less about when you get the government involved and more about how you involve yourself within those processes, if that makes sense. The other part is on funding. So you had mentioned funding for different businesses and stuff like that. There is a lot of earmarked money out there. And I think part of that is to be able to work with the funders and the bodies that have been identified to allocate that money to see how it fits. The challenge that I've seen with government is they're mandate driven. So if it doesn't fit their mandate, they literally can't do anything about it. So what happens is it's easier sometimes going to those nonprofits who are managing those funds to be able to say, hey, we want to do this thing. How do we do that together? And they'll be like, we can do X, Y, Z, but we definitely can't do A. But if you're asking for A, let's find a way to work together to make it X, Y, Z eligible, if that makes sense. So that's where I've seen like it really tough with that government stuff, because I'm working with a client right now where ISK literally was like, we can't do that. We can't give that service because it's not in our mandate. So they're trying, literally working with this client to create a service that they can fund, because they can't do that themselves, but they can fund the service. So it's an interesting, it's such a complex and interesting kind of level, but really frustrating at the same time. And that's why I was saying where being an active partner is the best way to do it. Because once you find that partnership, if you don't have the full capability, finding a partner, and I'm going to pitch QM here because I'm most familiar with QM, obviously, that QM has a very deep work portfolio. They have very deep relationships with people at the operational level in government. They know how to bid on work. And so what happens is, as an active partner, you can go to that top level. So you can say, hey, minister, blah, 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 this hit the streets, or this is coming down. We would like this, or what we saw last time didn't really work for us. So could we work together on something? And then have somebody like QM come up at that operational level when it does hit the street to say, this isn't worded right. And actually this specific line in the RFP doesn't make sense for our partnership. How do we work so that the operational people can't just say, oh, that's just how it is, too bad. What happens is your pre-work on that upper level will actually kind of make it evident that you're coming in, and that those operational people at the government level are going to want to make those changes, not just, if it was non-Indigenous or whatever, they just literally be like, no, too bad, right? See section, blah, blah, blah. And it's like, that was the section I was asking about, right? So yeah, definitely being an active partner is better than passive.
Another comment I was going to make, and you were talking about identifying capacity, and I know that you mostly spoke about bodies, talent, recruitment, laborers, whatever it would need. And so we know that a lot of nations also have land. And so I just want to bring that up, is that, that there's other assets that you can have. So you may not
100%.
have, the 50 bodies that you need. And so when we work with nations specifically, we always ask them to do, because a lot of times they'll have their land use codes, and they'll have certain land allocated for, cultural, residential, like all of those reasons, just like anybody else. But they'll also have unexpended TLEs, and if they've had past experience with urban reserves, and making sure that they're valuing that land and that they can bring that to the table as part of that partnership.
Yeah, 100%. And you know that I've heard it from industry people lots where they're like, they don't bring anything to the table, and it's like, are you kidding me? We wouldn't be here without them. So like, you know, it's and you are right. It's not just about people, and it's about the broader aspects of assets. So yeah, understanding, hey, we can do this with this land, right? Is this a laydown area? Even having an equipment list. So, you know, for having, you know, having partnership or going to those project site meetings, that if you have an equipment list, when somebody's like, oh yeah, we could use your help, what do you have, right? So you can say, yeah, I'll just, you know, we have 5 dozers, we've got, you know, 3 excavators, you know, all these things that if you can just say, yeah, give me your card, give me your contact info, I'll email you our contact list, and just getting it to them immediately so that they don't have a reason not to come to you.
And also that past business expertise. So we've heard it before. There's lots of indications that, oh, you know, Indigenous is only involved in casinos and gas stations. sorry if I've insulted anybody by that, but we know that we've expanded beyond that.
Yeah.
And so you know, we always encourage nations also when they're putting together their own investment attraction strategy, that, you know, even that casino and those, that's business experience. And so certain industries, and also knowing what industries that you're going after, making sure that you have a clear vision and a clear goal, in terms of, you know, there's so much that's, you know, sometimes people throw things at the walls and see what sticks kind of thing, but at the same point it's not aligned. You know, cannabis is an area, it might not be aligned with your nation's, you know, or your communities or your citizens' goals or expectations, or whatever. Mining is always a big thing in terms of, you know, raping the land and all those kind of things, and there's a lot of good networks and stuff out there. So yeah, lots to go into. I had one more question. Sorry, I don't want to control the whole conversation. So I had it written down here, and you were talking about IBAs, impact benefit agreements, and then in one of the slides before that, you were talking about a new era of inclusion, and it was Indigenous benefits agreements. And so are those the same thing, the impact benefit and the Indigenous benefits agreement, or are those separate?
Yeah, that might have been a typo on my intro slide there. But the Indigenous benefit plan, if you will, is it's the federal tool that they're using on a lot of these federal contracts now. So they'll say, what's the Indigenous benefit plan? Explain how you're going to hire, train businesses, or hire, train local people from these nations. What businesses are you going to employ? And then open other kind of stuff. So that might have been, a typo there.
Okay, because I noticed that you're using IBA and IBP interchangeably, and I was like,
No, yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, IBP and IPR, the, you know, typical federal stuff, right? About 15 million acronyms. But I also want to pay attention to the time here. Does anyone else have any questions?
So we got Larry, Harold, Ken, if you have anything. Patricia, always an honor to have you here and bringing those really good questions to the table. So thank you.
It's Ken here. If you can always count on me. Kear, you had mentioned a number of things that I have never seen anybody put together in a manual or a list, a checklist, and that is what I would call the incumbent advantage. So the incumbent has a number of advantages. Number one, he knows he's had a 5-year contract. He knows when that contract is coming up 5 years ahead of time. He knows what the price is because he's been paid that for the last 5 years. So target pricing. So giving advance notice, give it target pricing. He knows intimately what the job entails. So giving practice opportunities, shipping somebody a trailer load of, say, if you're repairing something, shipping somebody a trailer load. So a list of all those things. I mean, that's just a touch. We haven't got any more time, but that's just a start of a list of long list that would level the playing field for Indigenous potential suppliers to cut off that list of all the things that would help level the playing field. But we don't have a list like that. You've brought up a number of things, but I've never seen a checklist to the people in force and say, hey, you haven't done this. There's a whole bunch of things here, and not even Procurement Canada with their efforts haven't put one together. So anyway, my 2 cents.
Yeah, thanks, Ken. No, it's good comment. And what we're seeing, or what I've seen, is a lot of proponents on let's say larger projects like those 5 to 10 year projects, or standing offer agreements. They have opportunities to do subcontracts. So that's part of that talk to the client piece. So go to the feds, see how you can still get into those programs and leverage, kind of like Patricia, you were saying, what are those funding programs that allows you to access other pieces of funding so you can actually work or train people on that project? Because again, the procurement laws don't allow, it kind of goes down to that piece where private industry, they're not going to want to hire somebody on, even if it's the right thing to do, because it cuts into their profits. A lot of those long contracts are very tight margins. So they often will only send their junior people because they get paid the least, right? Where if you send your senior guy, you might be losing money on them, which it sounds weird, but that's the way they're set up. So they're set up so the junior people get trained and work on these projects. So you have to find those other funding arms within the government so that you can sneak into those pre-existing contracts. And then when it comes time for renewal, you're there doing the work and you can either bid on it, or you can go to that proponent and say, hey, we worked with each other the last 3 years. I want that piece for real this time, right? And I think because of we're in this new era of inclusion, that attitude, you don't have to give them major attitude, but you can be forward and say, hey, look, we're gonna, if you don't do it with us, we're probably gonna do it with somebody else. So, you want to work with us. Anyone else have any input? I know we're right at the top of the hour here.
Last chance, Larry or Harold. I just imagine you writing mad notes down right now. All right. Well, I appreciate you so much. Thank you. You're in the middle of a conference out there in Toronto, but you came here and brought some really great knowledge, very thorough. So thank you so much, Kear. Thank you all for joining us this afternoon. We hope to see you again. Hope the rest of your day, wherever you are, that you see the goodness around you, that Creator, brings goodness into our world. So thank you for being with us, and we'll see you next time. Take care.
Awesome. Thank you.